My name is Nora Vellam, and I was 35 the afternoon my parents told me my daughter's memorial service was too far to drive for one afternoon. I was standing in my kitchen when my mother said it. The window above the sink was open, and the smell coming in was cut grass and something sweet underneath it, the neighbor's honeysuckle that climbed the back fence every June, and I stood there with the phone against my ear, and I kept my face the way I keep it when I am reading a will that has been altered, and the family in front of me doesn't know. I can already see where the language changed. My mother said, "It's 4 hours each way, Nora. That's a full day. And your father's knee has been terrible." She paused. She said, "You know we loved Iris. You know that." I said I knew. I nodded once, and I hung up. 3 months later they arrived at my front door, asking to borrow rent money. I let them in. I went to my desk. I took out the cream envelope I had been keeping in the top left drawer for 6 years, and I set it on the kitchen table between us. Then I sat down and waited. Welcome back to channel, where still women carry more than anyone sees and let the envelope do the explaining. If you have ever held your tongue at a graveside moment and later wondered why you kept being the one to hold it, this one is for you. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up. I grew up in Millhaven, Pennsylvania, which is the kind of place that gets cold early and stays cold long, and where people have a particular relationship with endurance, not because they chose it but because the winters left them no alternative. My father was a union pipe fitter for 31 years. My mother kept the books for a small hardware supplier on the east side of town. They were people who valued practicality the way other families value warmth, and they had raised me to be useful, and I had taken that seriously in ways they never anticipated. I became an estate paralegal at 27. I work at a firm called Hendrick and Sable in the Garfield district of Pittsburgh, and what I do, at its plainest, is prepare the documents that decide where things go after people die. I read wills the way other people read weather, looking for the pressure systems, the places where the language shifts and something is about to change. I have learned to recognize when a document has been rushed, when a signature has been hesitated over, when a clause has been inserted late. I notice things in the text that the people who sign them missed entirely. My supervisor is a woman named Patricia Osei, who's been practicing estate law for 26 years, and who told me in my second year that I had the steadiest instincts for document irregularity she had ever seen in a paralegal. She said it the way she says most things, plainly, without decoration, and then she went back to the deposition she was preparing. I went back to my desk. I flagged 2 irregularities in the trust amendment I was reviewing before the afternoon was out. My daughter's name was Iris. She was 3 years old. She had a way of collecting small things, a smooth stone, a bottle cap, a single dried leaf, and lining them up on the windowsill in an order that made sense only to her. She died in March from a viral infection that moved faster than anyone expected on a Wednesday morning in the hospital, while I was holding her hand and the room smelled like clean linen and the particular stillness that comes before something irreversible. On my desk at home, I keep a small glass jar. Iris filled it with smooth stones from the creek behind my parents' house the summer she was 2. Every morning before I leave for work I pick it up and set it down again in the same spot. I do not look inside it. I just hold the weight of it for a moment. It tells me what the day is asking of me. My husband's name is Nora Vellam. He is a structural engineer who works long hours and who grieves quietly and specifically. He planted a Japanese maple in the backyard the April after Iris died, in the corner where she used to line up her stones, and he tends it the way he tends everything, with attention and without ceremony. When I told him what my parents had said about the memorial, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" I told him I wasn't sure yet. I went to my desk and I opened the top left drawer and I looked at the cream envelope sitting there, and I closed the drawer again. The cream envelope has been in that drawer since Iris was born. I started it the year she arrived, the same year my parents' circumstances began their long, slow tilt in my direction. The 6 years between Iris's birth and her memorial looked like this. I covered my parents' car registration fees for 3 consecutive years beginning the January Iris turned 1, because my father's work injury settlement had run out and they said the lapse would affect their insurance. The fee was $214 each year. I paid it online before they asked the second time. I drove to Millhaven on the first Saturday of every month for 14 months after my father's knee surgery because my mother could not manage the house maintenance alone and would not hire anyone because she said the estimates were insulting. I changed light bulbs. I carried laundry down from the second floor. I fixed the screen door in September when the hinge pulled loose from the frame. I did this for 14 consecutive Saturdays, 4 hours of driving each way, and I rescheduled a deposition preparation twice to make those trips. When my parents' furnace was condemned by their utility company, the February iris was 2, I wired them $3,100 before the replacement estimate came back. My father called it temporary. I wrote the amount and the date in the log. I researched and arranged my mother's annual eye appointments at a specialist in Pittsburgh for 3 consecutive years because her optometrist in Millhaven had retired and she said she couldn't navigate the referral system alone. I made the appointments. I confirmed their insurance acceptance. I picked her up twice when her prescription changed, and she said she couldn't drive home safely. I prepared and filed my parents' Pennsylvania state tax return for 4 consecutive years because my father said the online system gave him headaches and my mother said she didn't trust the numbers she got when she tried it herself. I did this each February on a Sunday over the phone, walking my father through every line. I paid 3 months of my parents' home internet bill in the fall. Iris was 3 because they had let it lapse and my mother said she needed it for her medical portal and could not manage the reconnection fee. The monthly bill was $67. The reconnection fee was $94. I paid both without being asked a second time. When my mother had a minor procedure done at Allegheny General the spring before Iris died, I took a half day from Hendrick and Sable, drove to Millhaven, brought her to Pittsburgh, sat in the waiting room for 3 hours preparing client files on my laptop, and drove her home. She said afterward that the surgeon had seemed young, and she wasn't sure he had explained everything clearly. I said I could call the office if she wanted. She said she'd think about it. She never brought it up again. My father's birthday is in October. I called every year, without fail. I sent a card to arrive the day before, never after, which requires planning 3 days in advance, and I included a check for $50 each year because he had mentioned once in 2018 that he liked having a little spending money that wasn't accounted for. I did this for 6 consecutive years. The cream envelope sat in the top left drawer of my desk, and I added to it after each of these things, and I told no one it existed, and I did not plan to use it. Iris died on a Wednesday in March. My parents did not come to the memorial. I went back to work the following Monday. I sat at my desk at Hendrick and Sable, and I read the documents in front of me, and I found the things in them that other people missed, and I did not think about the envelope until I got home that evening and walked past my desk, and the drawer was there, and I knew what was inside it, and I let it stay closed. That was how 3 months passed. Then my parents called about the rent. I sat at the kitchen table after I hung up with them, and the house was very quiet. Dov was in the backyard. Through the window, I could see him standing near the Japanese maple, not doing anything, just standing near it the way he does sometimes in the evenings. I watched him for a while. I didn't move. My parents called on a Tuesday evening, 10 days after I had let the voicemail about the rent sit unanswered. My father called first. He said they had been thinking about me, and they wanted to come up and see how I was doing. He said my mother had been worried. He said it in the way he said most things that were actually about something else. Slowly, with pauses in the right places, the way a careful person speaks when they are building toward a request and want the approach to feel like concern. I said that would be fine. I said I would see them Saturday. I told Dov that evening while he was making dinner. He didn't turn from the stove. He said, "Do you want me to be here?" I said yes. He said okay. He went back to what he was doing. That was the end of the conversation, and it was enough. They arrived at 11 on a Saturday morning. My mother came through the door first. She was wearing the navy cardigan she wore to anything she considered significant, and she smelled like the same soap she had used my entire life, something plain and faintly medicinal, the smell of the upstairs bathroom in the Millhaven house where I grew up. She hugged me in the way she hugs when she is aware of being observed, both arms fully engaged, a deliberate squeeze. She pulled back and held my face and said, "You look thin, Nora." I said I was fine. My father came in behind her. He had a paper bag from a bakery in Millhaven, the one on Fletcher Street that had been there since I was small. He set it on the counter and said, "Cinnamon rolls. Your favorite." I looked at the bag. They had been my favorite when I was 12. I said thank you. Dov made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. My mother looked around the kitchen the way she always did when she came to our house, a slow, assessing look that stopped on things and moved on without comment, which was its own kind of comment. She asked about Dov's work. He answered. My father talked about the drive up, the road work on the interstate, a story about a neighbor in Millhaven whose garage had flooded the week before. I drank my coffee. I let the morning be a morning. Then my father set down his mug. He said, "We wanted to talk to you about something." I said okay. He said things had gotten a little complicated since the winter. He said the pension adjustment had come in lower than expected, and there had been some medical expenses that had run longer than they planned. He said they had looked at all their options, and they didn't have many. He said if I could help cover 2 months of their rent while they got things reorganized, they would pay it back as soon as the pension reviewed in the fall. I said nothing. My mother folded her hands on the table. She said, "We wouldn't ask if we had another way, Nora. You know that. We know the timing is hard."
She paused.
"But you've always been the practical one. You understand these things in a way your father, and I just don't." I let her finish. Something in my chest went still in the way it goes still when I am reading a clause in a trust document, and I can already see how it will resolve, and the family across the table from me cannot yet. My father said, "You've built such a stable life, Nora. You and Dov both. We need a little steadiness right now." I kept my face still. Dov was at the counter refilling his coffee. I knew from the angle of his shoulders that he was listening to every word. My mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She said, "We think about Iris every day. We want you to know that. What happened was, it was devastating for all of us. We just process things differently. You've always known how to keep going. You've always been stronger than the rest of us that way." I let it pass. She said, "I know you were hurt that we couldn't be there for the memorial. But 4 hours each way, your father's knee, it wasn't a decision we made lightly. We thought about it. We really did." She squeezed my hand once and let it go. "The truth is, Nora, you've never really needed us there the way some people need their parents. You've always managed. That's not a criticism. It's actually the thing we're most proud of about you." There it was. You've never really needed us there the way some people need their parents. I looked at her. I kept my voice level. I said, "I understand." She sat back. She looked relieved. She said, "I knew you would." My father smiled the smile he smiles when a hard conversation turns a corner without breaking. He said, "So you'll think about the rent?" I said I would think about it. My mother said, "That's all we're asking." I said I knew. After they left, Dov washed the mugs. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the Japanese maple in the corner of the backyard. The leaves were the particular green of early summer, not yet the deep settled green they would become by August. I watched it for a while. Dov finished the mugs and stood beside me, and we looked at it together without saying anything. Then he said, "Nora." I said, "I know." He said, "You don't have to." I said, "I know that." He said, "What are you going to do?" I looked at the maple. I said, "What I do at work. Start from the beginning and follow it all the way through." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay." He went back to the kitchen. I heard him put the bakery bag in the recycling. That evening I sat at my desk. I opened the top left drawer, and I took out the cream envelope, and I set it in front of me under the desk lamp. I did not open it. I had not opened it in 3 months. I just set it there and looked at the outside of it, the way I look at a document before I begin, taking in the dimensions of it, the weight, the way it sits. I had started the log the February after Iris was born, the first time my parents called about the car registration. I had not started it out of suspicion. I had started it the way I start everything, because I am an estate paralegal, and I understand that the things people agree to in the moment and the things they remember agreeing to later are almost never the same, and documentation is the only thing that survives the distance between those two versions of events. I added to it after every transfer, every drive, every appointment scheduled and rescheduled. I printed a clean copy each January and folded it into the envelope and replaced the previous year's version. The log was currently 7 pages, single-spaced, organized by date, category, and amount. It was the most complete financial record of a private relationship I had ever maintained. I knew exactly what was in it. I put it back in the drawer. I closed the drawer. I turned off the desk lamp. 2 days later, I went to work. I sat at my desk at Hendrick and Sable, and I opened the Marchetti estate file, a contested trust amendment, 3 siblings, a property in the North Side, and I read the document from the first line, the way I always do, following the language until it told me where the problem was. I found it in 40 minutes. I flagged it in the margin in red. I wrote 2 sentences of annotation. I closed the file and opened the next one. On the way home, I stopped at the post office on Garfield Avenue and picked up a padded envelope I had ordered the week before. I brought it home. I set it on the desk next to the lamp. I did not use it yet. I looked up my parents' lease online that evening. They had sent me a copy 2 years ago when they moved to the new building, and I had saved it in my files the way I save everything. I read the relevant clauses. I noted the grace period. I noted the late fee structure. I put the laptop away. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table, and I did not call my parents, and I did not think about the envelope again until the following Saturday when I woke at 6 and lay still in the dark for a moment, and then got up. I picked up the glass jar from my desk and held it for a moment. I set it back. I took the cream envelope from the top left drawer. I took the padded envelope from beside the lamp. I slid the cream envelope inside the padded envelope. I sealed it. I wrote my parents' address on the front in my regular handwriting. I set it by the door next to my keys. I put the kettle on. I got dressed. The kettle finished. I poured the water. I set the mug on the counter, and I stood at the window and looked at the Japanese maple while the tea steeped. The morning was clear, and the leaves were moving very slightly in a wind I couldn't feel from inside. I watched them for a while. Then I picked up the mug, and I went to the door, and I picked up the padded envelope and my keys, and I went to the car. I drove to the post office on Garfield Avenue. I handed the padded envelope across the counter. The clerk weighed it and printed the label and told me the total. I paid. I kept the receipt. I drove to work. My parents called that evening. I watched my mother's name on the screen until it stopped. Then my father called 20 minutes later, and I watched his name until it stopped. I set the phone face down on the desk beside the glass jar of smooth stones. I did not listen to the voicemails that night. They called again the following morning, then twice more the day after that. On the 4th day, a letter arrived, handwritten, on the blue stationery my mother kept in the drawer beside the kitchen phone in Millhaven. I set it on the desk beside the jar and did not open it. I went to work. I read the Marchetti file. I found 2 more irregularities in the amendment language, and I annotated both and sent the summary to Patricia Osei before noon. She replied in 12 minutes. She said, "Good catch on the second one. I missed it entirely." I printed her reply and put it in the file the way I put everything. On the 5th day, my mother called and left a voicemail that was 4 minutes long. I listened to the first 40 seconds. She said the envelope had arrived and she didn't understand what it was supposed to mean, and she thought we needed to talk in person, and she and my father were going to drive up on Saturday if I didn't call back before then. I did not call back. On Saturday, they knocked on our door at 11. I had known they would come. I opened the door. My mother was wearing the navy cardigan again. My father was behind her with his hands in his jacket pockets, which was the posture he took when he was prepared to be reasonable at some cost to himself. My mother looked at me and then passed me into the house the way she always did, as if checking whether anything had changed since her last visit. I said, "Come in." Dov was at the kitchen table with his coffee and a set of structural drawings he had been reviewing. He looked up when they came in. He said, "Good morning." My father said, "Good morning." My mother said, "Hello, Dov," and set her bag on the counter near the door. I poured 2 mugs of coffee without being asked. My parents both take it the same way, my father with 1 sugar, my mother black, and I set them on the table. I sat down. My parents sat across from me. Dov rolled his drawings and moved to the far end of the table and sat with his coffee. He did not leave the room. My mother wrapped both hands around her mug. She said, "We got the envelope, Nora." I said I knew. She said, "I've read it twice and I'm still not sure what you're trying to tell us." I said, "I think you are." My father said, "Is this about the memorial? Because if this is about the memorial, we've already explained. Nora, we've already talked about this." I kept my voice level. I said, "I know we have." He said, "Then what is this?" He put his hand flat on the table. "What does a list of numbers have to do with asking your daughter for a little help when things are tight?" I said nothing. My mother said, "I don't think it's fair to keep a record of the things you've done for us and then present it like a bill. Like we owe you something. We're your parents." Her voice had the particular quality it got when she was working herself towards something, higher at the edges, tightening in the middle. Families help each other. That's what families do. You've helped us, and we've helped you in ways that don't get written down. I let her talk. She said, "We were there when you and Dov needed us. We drove up when you were moving. We came for Iris when she was born." Her voice dipped on Iris's name and steadied again. "We were there, Nora. We showed up when it mattered." Something in my hands went cold. Not from the words. From recognizing how many times I had heard a version of this, the accounting that ran backward from today and stopped before it reached the parts that didn't fit. My father said, "Your mother is right. We're not perfect, but we've been there. And the one time we couldn't make it, one time, you're going to hold that over us?" He looked at Dov. "You understand this, Dov. Tell her this isn't reasonable." Dov looked at the table. He said, "I think Nora should speak for herself." My mother said, Nora, we love you. We have always loved you. But you have always been so capable. You've never needed us the way some children need their parents, and we've always thought of that as a testament to who you are. You are self-sufficient. You built this." She gestured at the kitchen, the house, the life in it. "We never worried about you the way we'd worry about someone who needed more from us. That's not a failure on our part. That's the truth about who you are." I stayed still the way I do when I am reading the final clause of a contested document, and the whole resolution of the thing is sitting right there in one sentence and nobody else in the room has seen it yet. I let her finish. Then I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I reached into my cardigan pocket and I took out the 7 pages of the payment log, folded once across the middle, and I unfolded them slow, one fold at a time, until they lay flat on the kitchen table between my coffee mug and my mother's hands. The top of the first page read, "Payment record," and Vellam, February, year through present. Below that, in 2 columns, dates on the left, categories and amounts on the right. The first entry was dated the February after Iris was born. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago. My mother looked at it. My father looked at it. Dov looked at his coffee. No one spoke. My mother reached forward and touched the edge of the first page. She read the first 3 lines. Her breath came out once, slowly, through her nose. She did not turn the page. She said, "Nora, what is this supposed to prove?" My father picked up the pages and read further down the first column. His jaw worked once. He set the pages back down. He said, "We paid some of this back." I said, "The ones you paid back are marked. They're in the right column." He looked at the page again. He looked for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. The Japanese maple outside the window moved in the same small wind it had been moving in all morning. My mother's coffee was getting cold. Neither of them touched it. My mother said, "I don't know what you want from us, Nora. An apology? Is that what this is?" Her voice shook once and steadied. "We did the best we could. We have always done the best we could. And you kept a record. Like we were clients. Like we were something you were managing." She looked at Dov. "Did you know about this?" Dov said, "Yes." She looked back at me. Her eyes were bright, and her hands were flat on the table now, very still, the way hands go when the body is working hard to hold itself together. She said, "I don't recognize this. I don't recognize you doing this." I waited. My father said quietly, "Say something, Nora." I looked at my mother. Then I looked at my father. Then I looked at the pages on the table. I said, I'm going to say 3 things. I said, you told me I've never needed you the way some children need their parents. You said it like it was something you were proud of. But I didn't stop needing you. I learned early that needing you came without a floor, that I could need you and nothing would arrive. So I stopped asking and I started doing it myself. That's not self-sufficiency. That's something else. My mother opened her mouth. I said, I'm not finished. I said, you told me you showed up when it mattered. You did. You came when Iris was born. You drove up when we moved. And then you did not come when I buried her. You told me 4 hours each way was too far. I paused. I have driven 4 hours each way to Millhaven 37 times in 6 years. The log has the dates. I looked at my mother. I said, you told me you never worried about me because I never needed more from you. I want you to understand that I have been giving you more for 6 years. The pages on the table are what that looked like. What I needed from you was one afternoon in March. I needed you to stand at a graveside and be my parents for one afternoon. That is not in the log. That is the only thing I ever asked you for that you did not give. I picked up the pages from the table. I stood. I said, I hope the drive home is easy. I walked to the front door. I opened it. I went through it. I pulled it behind me until the latch caught, quietly all the way. I sat in the car in the driveway for a few minutes. The morning was still clear. The neighbor's honeysuckle was climbing the fence on the far side of the yard, the same as it had been in June when my mother called about the memorial. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I looked at the fence for a while. Then I drove to the post office on Garfield Avenue and picked up a padded return envelope I had requested the week before and drove home. Dov called me while I was in the car. I answered. He said they had left about 5 minutes after I did. He said my father had sat at the table for a while after I went out and read the rest of the first page and then set it down carefully, the way you set something down when you are not sure what to do with your hands. He said my mother had cried briefly at the counter and then stopped and picked up her bag and said they should go. He said neither of them had said anything about the rent. He said, "Are you okay?" I said I was clear. He said, "That's not what I asked." I said I knew. I said I'd be home in 10 minutes. I heard him exhale. He said, "Okay." My mother called 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail. She left 2 minutes and 40 seconds of message that I listened to once, standing at my desk. She said she had been thinking. She said she thought we had both said things we needed to process. She said she hoped I would call when I was ready. She did not mention the rent. I put the phone face down on the desk. I picked up the glass jar. I held the weight of it for a moment, the smooth stones pressing against my palm through the glass. I set it back in its spot. I went to the kitchen and made coffee and took it to the table and sat down with the Aldrich file Patricia had sent over the night before, a straightforward estate, one beneficiary, one property, everything in order, and I read it from the first page to the last. The payment log is in the filing cabinet in my office now, in a folder labeled with the year range and nothing else. I have not added to it. I do not expect to need to. Dov tends the Japanese maple every Saturday morning. I watch him from the kitchen window sometimes while the coffee brews. He prunes it carefully, the way he does everything, with attention and without ceremony. It is taller than it was in April. By next spring it will be taller still.
I still go to work the same way.
I still read documents from the first line and follow them until they tell me the truth. I still flag the irregularities before anyone else does. That part has not changed. What has changed is quieter than that. It is the difference between keeping a record because you might need it someday and knowing now that the record was always for you, that the act of writing things down was the only honest accounting of what the years had actually cost, and that the cost was real whether anyone else read the log or not. Patricia Osei stopped at my desk one afternoon about 2 weeks after the Saturday in the kitchen. She set a file down and looked at me and said, "You seem different." I said, "I thought I was the same." She said, "No, you're lighter." She picked up the file and walked back to her office. I thought about that for a while. Then I went back to the document in front of me. The things we give without being asked are still real after we stop giving them. They do not disappear because no one wrote them down. but the ones who gave them are allowed to know what they were. That's my story. One glass jar of smooth stones on a desk that a 3-year-old girl filled at a creek the summer she was 2. One cream envelope in a top left drawer that sat there for 6 years before it needed to be opened. One kitchen table in Pittsburgh where 7 pages of dates and amounts finally lay flat in the morning light. If you have been keeping track of what you have given and calling it nothing, find a quiet afternoon and write it down. Not to show anyone, just to know. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.